Hello, and welcome back to the Punt Intended podcast, a Dynasty fantasy basketball podcast and a sports ethos production presented by FanDuel. As always, I am your host, Mark C., the Dynasty leader over at Sports Ethos. On today's episode, we're going to start deep diving into players and teams and just detailing why players are risers, why they're fallers, looking at team dynamics and seeing how we can project that going forward for our Dynasty squads. Today, we will lead off a discussion on why I prefer rate stats and why they should be your go-to over just looking at simple per raw game stats. Yeah, even though raw stats are what counts for fantasy, why am I telling you to ignore them? We'll get into that. Then we will examine why Keyonte George has been thriving early in the season for the Utah Jazz, while contrasting that against Shaedon Sharpe, who has been floundering so far this season for fantasy. Lastly, we'll end with a look ahead on the Toronto Raptors and just examine their team dynamics and seeing what is there to watch for from the Raptors for dynasty managers. Before we get into all that, a little bit of housekeeping. You can find me over at Blue Sky at Mark C Sports Ethos and on Twitter at MacAttack145. My writings and rankings can be found at sportsethos.com with an NBA Fantasy Pass subscription. We are on YouTube. We'll be sharing some stats and info throughout the entirety of this pod. So go ahead, watch over on YouTube. If you already are watching, hit that like button. Also, my mother and father-in-law, they always tune in and watch. So I'm going to give them a little bit of shout out here. Hey, appreciate you watching. Appreciate you following along. And of course, all y'all should follow along too. If you are listening on audio, that's great too. I'll be sure to read out whatever stats I'm referencing or looking at. But please go ahead, rate, review, leave a subscribe to the podcast. That sort of stuff really does help the growth and would be much appreciated from myself. All right, let's get into the topic of the pod here and the lead topic, and that is looking at just your simple per game raw stats. Yeah, why would that matter? And why I prefer looking at rate stats and analyzing players from a dynasty perspective. So let's define the terms here first. Per game stats are quite simply how many stats you get in the games you play on average. So that's as simple as you play 32.9 minutes a night. You get 6.5 rebounds a night. You get 2.3 assists per night. You get 1.3 blocks per night. That's it. Pretty simple. That's what you'll see on pretty much any straight up fantasy platform. You'll see the per game stats, usually in averages. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that is what counts for fantasy, is those raw per game stats. That's what we're pretty much tracking. And yeah, I mean, that's what helps us win our matchups. So I'm obviously not saying I don't care about those. I obviously care a ton about these per game stats. And but if I'm trying to go deeper, right? I'm trying to just give you insights. And as a dynasty analyst, I try to go further. And I think it's really easy to just look at per game stats and be like, yeah, player X increases points from 10 to 15. Of course he's on the rise. I mean, yeah, that's great and all. I think that's pretty surface level. I want to go deeper and see, okay, is this expected to sustain? Can this player actually do more? Is there reasons to think this will continue? Is there reason to think that this actually doesn't represent the player's skill level and maybe it's just an increase in minutes? Now, rate stats, looking at those are stats per some measuring metric in which you can kind of normalize or then compare across players at different play time. The most typical rate stats you'll see out there are per 36 minutes or per 100 possessions. Per 36 minutes, you're just basically saying the player puts up this amount of stats in this minutes per game. What if that player played exactly 36 minutes a game? What would those player stats be? Now, per possession takes that a step further. Various teams play at different paces. The Raptors play very upbeat. The Miami Heat play very upbeat versus a team like the Clippers or the Lakers who play a lot slower. And thus, they have a lot more possessions per game, which means players on the Heat or the Raptors have a chance to accumulate more stats per game. But if you're talking about on basically a per possession or per play basis is another way to think about this, maybe they don't actually accumulate stats on that basis as much. So per 100 possessions basically says, all right, what are the player stats that they get and how many possessions are on the floor? Let's take that and measure it over 100 possessions and marginalize it, or not marginalize it, but equalize it that way. And I think per possession is even better than per 36 minutes because it will basically give you the most, not the most clearest, but a clearer idea of what a player could produce and kind of their quote unquote true talent production output. I'm putting that true talent in quotes because obviously there's a ton of other factors that come into play rather than just doing stats over a per possession basis. But it is a way to identify if a player is increasing their production. Okay, so why does this distinction matter, Mark? It's just been a few minutes explaining this to me and probably some more nerdy mumbo jumbo. Well, I think we all know players who accumulate stats via minutes that are fine fantasy players, but aren't necessarily impacting us on a week-to-week basis. Players like Tobias Harris. Tobias Harris has been the poster child of this sort of theory for years. Taurean Prince at a much lower level. Aaron Naismith gets plenty of minutes, but the stats aren't always that impressive. Dorian Finney-Smith, kind of this player type as well. Maybe Christian Braun fits in this category some. These players are range from, good rotation players to great starting players. And these are impactful NBA players. But they aren't necessarily impactful fantasy players. Really, they get production just by basis of being on the court. If you're on the court for some period of time, you are going to accumulate stats. But what we really care about is that greater propensity for garnering stats. That if you're on the court, I know that you're going to gobble up rebounds. If you're on the court, I know you're going to be a ball hawk and get plenty of steals. And so players like Tobias Harris, Aaron Naismith, Dorian Finney-Smith, they're good. They're good players. That's why they get the minutes they get. But I don't think anyone's, if they get Tobias Harris in a trade, they're thinking they are massively improving their dynasty standing because it's just kind of, okay, it's a little bit across the board, but my points aren't significantly better. My threes, my boards, my blocks, my steals, none of those dramatically increased. So these players obviously matter for Dynasty, but they are more of, all right, okay, guys, that you're happy to roster, but not, they're not going to have usually that many pop-off performances or hugely impactful performances on a week-to-week basis. I sometimes refer to these guys as steady eddies or glue guys. Because again, you're not going to feel awful starting them. But you probably don't feel either great about them if you really need a lot from them in a singular night. Instead, for Dynasty, sometimes you want to look for those players that can have those pop-off performances or really intrigue in certain areas if you know they get the minutes. So even if they don't have that playtime yet, they have the potential for great fantasy production if they were to get that playtime. Think of players like Adam Bona. If he gets minutes, you're getting a ton of blocks. You're getting some helpful rebounds. Cason Wallace has graduated from this category somewhat, but early in his career, he was this player for steals. TJ McConnell has been this player for years, where when he gets the minutes, you're getting impactful assists. This applies to a number of three-point bombers, whether in the rotation or more off the bench. Your Sam Merrills, your Sam Hausers, your Malik Beasley was this sort of player for years, where if he gets minutes, you're getting plenty of threes. AJ Mitchell is kind of that now with points, although he's definitely on the rise and maybe probably more than that. Trey Jones has been this player with assists and steals. Someone who I said was a big buy in the 2025 trade deadline, and now he's getting more minutes with some injuries in the rotation, and he's significantly helping your assists and steals. These are the type of players that actually influence specific stats versus just kind of jack of all trades versus those steady eddies. These are players that can impact specific categories and give you wins on a weekly basis. And typically, these impact per rate players are the ones that develop in the better dynasty assets over time because they actually impact something rather than those steady eddies who are useful but not dramatically helpful. And now we get to the money question. How do you actually identify these players before they enter in the rotation? Because it's easy to look at the per game stats now and see, well, yeah, Cason Wallace is obviously helping me in steals. Adam Bona is obviously helping me in boards and blocks when he plays. But the real question, the real thing that will help your dynasty squads is how to identify these players. And what you can use to help you with that is using those rate stats we mentioned at the top here. Looking at players' performances on that per minute or per possession basis, and then translating that in the future fantasy production. Now, I mentioned per 36 minutes. I mentioned per 100 possessions. I actually prefer using per 75 possessions. There's actually roughly a little over 100 possessions in each NBA game for each team. So, and there's roughly 48 minutes of play in an NBA game. High-end starters play 36 minutes. Not every starter plays 36 minutes, but just roll with me here for a second. 36 over 48 minutes, that's 3/4 of a game. 3/4 of 100 possessions is 75 possessions. So if you then take the per 100 possessions and just do 3/4 of that, you get per 75 possessions, and you can get an idea of what a player can produce if they get high-end starting minutes. Obviously, that's a little fungible. Not every player in Dynasty is obviously getting 36 minutes a game, but I think it gives a clear idea. If you just want to look at what could the per game production look like, look at per 75 possessions. And that's where I look at, honestly, that's why I reference per 75 possessions when talking about players a lot. But let's look at some examples of the players I mentioned here, and now look at where we could have seen this coming from. So let's look at Tobias Harris first. And we're going to look at his career because he's played for 15 seasons. That's actually crazy. I didn't realize he'd been playing for that long. With 15 seasons, he's averaged 32 minutes a game. Yeah, that's great playing time over a 15-year career. 16 points. Yeah, okay, that's pretty fine. 6.2 rebounds. Okay, sure. 2.4 assists, 0.8 steals, 0.6 blocks, 1.3 threes a game. That's all fine. That's nothing wrong with that production. But does anything stand out there as, yeah, oh my gosh, you are really helping this category, Tobias Harris? No. We can look at his per 100 possessions, and I mean, similarly, nothing stands out per 100 possessions. 25 points, 9.6 boards, about 4 assists, 1.2 steals, almost a block per 100 possessions. That is fine production. Again, it's not outstanding production there. Now let's look at a player that we mentioned earlier, in Adam Bona. We look at Tobias Harris, and we'll use his boards and blocks here. His boards per 100 possessions for Tobias Harris was 9.6. His blocks 0.9 per 100 possessions. Adam Bona's stats in those same categories, 12.8 rebounds per 100 possessions, 3.9 blocks per 100 possessions. You can clearly see where Bona can help these categories specifically and provide a huge impact in them by looking at those per rate stats, these per 100 possession stats. And of course, yeah, Tobias Harris is better in other categories than Adam Bona. I'm not trying to make that argument. I'm making the argument that these per rate stats can identify these players before they fully emerge into NBA rotations. And now, if you want a boards and blocks streamer and Bona is set for big minutes, you know to pick him up because you know he can give this production. But you would have known that before he started putting up these big games. Let's look at another player who's emerged here early in the season in Josh Minott. Now, Minott's obviously been someone who's emerged in the Dynasty community. If you look at his per game stats, right? Nearly 7 boards a game, 1.5 steals a game, little over 3 per game. He's becoming a very useful player for Dynasty. And plenty of people are asking, yeah, like what more can he do? But could we have seen this coming? And the answer is yes, we definitely probably should have seen this coming. And I mean, I did. I didn't think it was going to be this abrupt, but yeah, I mean, he's clearly producing right now. Look at his per 100 possession stats in prior seasons. Steals 2.0, 2.7, 2.7 in the 3 seasons prior to Boston. Rebounds 12.4, 9.2, 8.4 boards per 100 possessions. There were already these inklings. You can think of them as little Blues clues. These are little blue paw prints signifying that, hey, yeah, Josh Minott could be a helpful steals and boards player if he got the minutes. And he's actually even doing better in those categories so far this season. 14.5 boards per 100 possessions. 3.1 steals per 100 possessions this season. That is impactful fantasy production in those categories. That frankly was there. Yeah, I mean, Minott's proving that, hey, you can look at some of these per rate stats and identify sleepers, identify players who could emerge as fantasy options before they actually emerge as fantasy options, really. Let's look at another player here in Ryan Rollins. Another points a game, great. 2 steals a game, fantastic. Should we have seen this coming? Or yeah, I mean, there was a chance of this happening. Look now, let's look at Ryan Rollins per 100 possession stats. Frankly, didn't play that much earlier. And when you look at such 0.5 steals, average 6.1 assists, average 2.9 threes, you can bring that down per day. And in fact, on a categories, 3.23, 3.0 steals per 100 possessions. No, I said in my Bucks preview that, again, I wouldn't have projected it to go this smoothly, but he is clearly showing that he is a good, I think, NBA player. And a good fantasy player and a good player for Dynasty. And there were ways that we could have seen these coming with those Blues clues, those Blues prints all over these rate stats. I mentioned some of the flaws with looking at per rate. That is a small sample sizes. And overall game against bench units, it's just different than playing a full starter's load. So if you're extrapolating, a 10-minute per game performance to 30 minutes per game, even if it's on a per rate, there's different factors there. Normally, if a player does increase their minutes per game, I would expect their per rate stats to go down. Their overall production is still going to go up because they're playing more minutes and giving you more production. But I do expect their per rate stats to look a little worse. And that's okay. That's okay because you're playing more per game. And yeah, I don't expect you to give the same amount of energy in 10 minutes as you do 30 minutes. So the fact that Josh Minott and Ryan Rollins are actually increasing their per rate stats is just chef's kiss, is amazing to see for their development. Now, which stats should we care about, though, from a per rate stats to truly unearth Dynasty gems? That is something I go into detail with in my latest Dynasty article. I discuss what stats we can trust, and even in just a 2-week sample, and how that reflects on some of the players. I talk about Josh Minott and Ryan Rollins in that article, but I talk about 5 or 6 others as well. So be sure and check that out on Sports Ethos with these per rate stats to unearth Dynasty gems in your league. All right, let's get into our first player deep dive here. And it's going to be Keyonte George, who has really impressed here in the early going for the Jazz and really for Dynasty. We'll start just looking at his raw per game stats here. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? Why he's doing so good. 5.6 assists last season to 7.2 assists this season per game. His points up from 17 a game last season to 22 a game this season. Field goal percentage up from 39% last season to 43% this season. Keyonte George is just showing a lot more control of the offense. And he really has impressed here in the early going. He looks so much more in control, looks to be controlling the pace of the game more rather than getting befuddled by it. There's a lot less desperate, contested, long mid-two rangers later in the shot clock. He's actually getting to the rim. You can see that with his free throw attempts being so much higher. Keyonte George is making better passes and just, quite simply looks so much more in control of himself and of the offense and his understanding of the pace of the NBA. The league is taking notice. Per FanDuel, Keyonte George's most improved player odds up to plus 2,500 as of November 9th. So we're seeing Keyonte George produce. We're seeing him improve as a player. I said in my Jazz Outlook series that Keyonte George, I thought he was just more of a 6-man combo guard. But so far this season, he has looked more of a average, I would say above average lead initiating guard, being able to lead the offense. There are so many times that I've watched the Jazz this season, and I think Keyonte George is going to pass to this player on the wing or this player on the roll, and he makes a pass that makes me go, whoa, like where'd that pass come from? I didn't see that angle. I didn't think that player was open at all, but Keyonte George saw that player was open, and he made that exquisite pass and with perfect touch to create a great shot for his team. Just a side note, if a player is making the sorts of passes that you didn't see coming and it's a good pass and it leads to a good thing for the team, that's probably indicative that the player has good passing vision. If he's tricking us on the screen, he's probably tricking out defenses and just making really smart, incisive passes. And that's exactly what Keyonte George is doing this season. Now, Mark, you just talked about how we just don't want to look at per game stats. And you are absolutely right. So let's go underneath the hood a little bit and look at just some specific aspects where Keyonte George has really upped his level of play. Now, we mentioned the passing already. And you can see here, it's definitely already much better on a per rate status. Last year, Keyonte George averaged 8.6 assists per 100 possessions. This year, he's up to 10.3 assists per 100 possessions. That assist rate, 27% last year. 27% is a pretty solid range, but it's up to 36% assist rate this season. That is a super strong number for Keyonte George, one that is towards the top of the entire NBA. That's screaming to me. That's a huge Blues paw print there, Blues Clues paw print, saying, yeah, Keyonte George has really upped the talent level of his passing. And it's a way to match the stats to my eye test and be like, yeah, I'm seeing this. The league is seeing this. Keyonte George is showing this. He is showing that he is becoming a great, I don't want to say great initiator guard. He's on the path to becoming a great lead initiator for the offense. Let's talk about his shooting a little bit now. And you could say it's a bit of a mixed bag overall, right? You just look at the raw 3-point percentage. Oh, his 3-point attempts are down per 100 possessions. His 3-point percentage is down from 34% this season to just 27.5% this season. But shooting percentages are something in just even 3 weeks that are fluctuate a ton. And I mean, I don't think Keyonte George is going to be at 27.5% the entire season. And you might say, well, don't you want a player to take more threes? Sometimes yes, but sometimes no. In the Keyonte George's case, he's taking less threes because he's actually getting to the basket more and taking more 2-point field goals and good 2-point field goals. That's why his 2-point attempts per 100 possessions are up from 9.4 to 13.5 this season. That's why he's shooting 52.5% from 2 this season, up from about 45% last season. That's a significant improvement. And it's one because Keyonte George is getting to the rim more. Yeah, he's running a little hot from inside, but he's running hot from inside, shooting really well at the rim. Let's say that comes down a little bit. Well, I expect the 3-point percentage to come up as well. And so I think that will balance itself out. And what's really great about Keyonte George's shot profile here is look at these free throw attempts. Keyonte George is averaging 12.1 free throw attempts per 100 possessions, which is a gargantuan number. That is very impressive for a guard of his stature. That is up from 6.5 free throw attempts per 100 possessions last season. That is significant improvement from George, and that really symbolizes just how much he has improved in this area of his game. And I think that's why this field goal percentage seems real because of the changing shot profile. Yeah, I mean, Keyonte George just looks like a different player this year. And I asked the question in my Jazz preview: do the Jazz have a good enough lead initiating guard for the future? I was very uncertain on that now. Not now. I was very uncertain on that then, but now I think the answer might be Keyonte George. And that is obviously going to pay dividends for fantasy managers. Now, will this role continue for Keyonte George? Because we've seen him in the past toggle as, okay, try to lead the offense, okay, try to be off ball. And we actually saw that last Friday night with when Isaiah Collier came back to play. And the Jazz seemed to want to integrate Isaiah Collier a lot as being that on-ball guard, and it shifted Keyonte George off-ball. However, I think this might have just been a first game thing back for Collier. Let's try to get him comfortable. But with what Keyonte George has shown to date so far, I don't think the Jazz should just bottle him back up. No, they should want to see what Keyonte George can keep doing this season in that lead on-ball guard role. And I think we'll see George return to the role that we saw him at the beginning of the season soon enough. And I think this is very real from Keyonte George. And this is probably the most impressive stretch of his career. So I'm getting kind of back in on Keyonte George here as his lead guard ball option, which should lead to a nice amount of threes, plenty of points, good free throw percentage, plenty of assists, all stats that are going to be awesome for dynasty managers. So if you stuck around with Keyonte George, I think you got to feel pretty happy about that so far to date. Let's shift from Keyonte George now, who I think has been flourishing in this lead guard role. Let's go to Shaedon Sharpe, who is kind of the opposite. I think he's been floundering a little bit in the early season here. And you could just say, well, yeah, I mean, his scoring's down per game. And that's because he's playing less minutes and his shooting percentages are down. Mark, you don't seriously think Shaedon Sharpe is going to continue shooting 38% from the field, right? He's not going to shoot below 25% from 3 for the whole season. And I would say, of course, I don't think that. I just said in Keyonte George's segment that he's not going to probably shoot that well from inside, and we can't trust early season's shooting percentages. And I don't think Shaedon Sharpe is going to shoot this poorly. That's not why Shaedon Sharpe is a faller in Dynasty for me. It's because of this assist number. Shaedon Sharpe is averaging 1.4 assists per game this season. 1.4 assists per game, that is such a paltry number, and that's doing nothing for your dynasty squads. For a player that we were hoping to see more of this playmaking, more of this passing from, and for him to develop from that level of just a scoring wing to a basically an initiating guard or creation guard, Sharpe has shown none of those flashes this season. He's clearly had the opportunity, right? I said it in my Blazers Outlook series. With Scoot Henderson out for a good portion of the early season, someone's going to have to step up with the creation duties. Would it be Deni Avdija? Would it be Shaedon Sharpe? Would it be Drew Holiday? So far, Drew Holiday and Deni Avdija have stepped up. Shaedon Sharpe has not stepped up to the plate yet. And Mark, you could say to me right now that, yeah, I mean, his passing's obviously down. He's playing only 27 minutes per game, down from 31 minutes per game last season. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's completely fair. Yeah, let's look at the per rate stats now. Is Sharpe passing at the same rate that he did last season? Emphatically, Shaedon Sharpe is not. Look at these assists per 100 possessions for Shaedon Sharpe. About 4.3 assists per 100 possessions last season. This year, it's down to 2.5 assists per 100 possessions for Shaedon Sharpe. That is just not getting it done if you want to be an impactful, high on-ball usage player in this league. 2.5, this shows me you are not. You should not that you can't be a high usage on-ball player, but you're definitely more in the scoring only category than scoring with some assist. And his assist percentage reflects that. I mean, he's had a pretty paltry assist percentage in his career, but it's down to 8.5 assist rate this season. That's just not good for Shaedon Sharpe. I do like that his 3-point volume is up and that he's maybe just trying to up those 3-point shots a little bit more. I like seeing 12.3 3-point attempts per 100 possessions. And I do trust the shooting percentages. Again, we'll get back to what we've seen in his career. But the assist percentage is just really damning here from an early season standpoint. And you could point to, well, okay, at least I know Shaedon Sharpe is struggling from offense right now, but at least his defense is better, right? Hey, 2.8 steals per 100 possessions. That's good, right? And I agree. Shaedon Sharpe averaging 2.8 steals per 100 possessions is very good for him and for any player. The issue is that Shaedon Sharpe has never shown to be a high steals player in his career. Past 3 seasons, 1.0 steals per 100 possessions, 1.3 steals per 100 possessions, 1.3 steals per 100 possessions. Steals aren't something that normally just pops up, even for a player in his 4th season. And I'm not expecting Sharpe to suddenly just develop a propensity for steals. I don't think that's something that's just going to randomly come up and be a positive skill for him. And I expect the steal rate to actually tick back down, to go back to that 1 to 1.5 steals per 100 possessions, which really isn't doing too much for you in fantasy. So what is Sharpe actually doing for us in fantasy? What is he actually giving you that's helping you win on a weekly basis? It's mainly just points and threes. That's the only 2 categories that he's helping in massively. And that's really all he projects to help in massively. Maybe you'll get a handful of rebounds. Maybe you'll get a slew of assists, a few assists. But that's it for fantasy for Shaedon Sharpe, really. And that's all he's showing us right now. The isolation and dribble game can be there for Shaedon Sharpe, and that can be useful for NBA teams. But he's not an active passer. He's not seeing those passing angles. He's never making those passes that make me go, whoa. Like, Shaedon Sharpe, I didn't see that pass. It's amazing that you saw that pass. I mean, we talked about that sort of ability with Keyonte George. You don't see Shaedon Sharpe making those types of passes. I don't want to poo-poo too much on Shaedon Sharpe here because, I mean, I've liked his growth in the isolation scoring department. It's just a very narrow avenue for fantasy success. And even if it hits fully, it's not a player that is it's just not a player that ends up helping you too much win your fantasy matchups. And that's basically why Shaedon Sharpe is on the downturn for me in Dynasty. It's because of it's just the stats aren't there to back up an impactful fantasy player at the end of the day. I'm hoping he turns it around. I think the efficiency should come around soon. But for the assists and the steals, I think the story may be a little written for Shaedon Sharpe. Let's end the pod by looking at the team I'm honing in on for this upcoming week, and it's going to be the Toronto Raptors. No lie, the Toronto Raptors have actually been fun to watch this season. And I thought it was going to be a little bit of a mess with the interplay between Brandon Ingram, RJ Barrett, Scotty Barnes, and Emmanuel Quickley. But it's actually kind of fun. It's pretty free flowing for the most part. And I think this is pretty reflective in their stats. I theorized that quartet of Quickley, Barnes, Barrett, and Ingram would kind of eat at each other's stats a little bit. But so far, they're all kind of producing pretty well. I mean, look at their assists per game. 6.3 assists a game for Quickley. Nearly 5 assists a game for Scotty Barnes. Nearly 4 assists for RJ Barrett. Nearly 4 assists for Brandon Ingram. And if you look at their points, 21 points for Ingram, 21 points for RJ Barrett, 20 points for Scotty Barnes, 14.5 points for Quickley, where Quickley's slow shooting start has kind of more contributed to that. All these players are scoring and assisting. And that has definitely raised my eyebrows from Dynasty is that, okay, maybe all these players can actually coexist and they all can contribute well and they all can just be great fantasy producers. That's what I really want to look at for this team in the upcoming week is how are all these players playing together? How is this all working? And if it's working pretty well, I actually am going to probably raise all these Raptors a little bit because it looks like they all can produce pretty well for fantasy. I'm just interested to dive into the film on them and dive into their games and just see how it looks. Jakob Poeltl is the other starter here. He's only played in 6 games to date so far as of November 9th. 23 minutes a game, partially some injuries, partially some foul trouble. I think it's kind of you're getting what you expect from those minutes, but you want those minutes to be better. Colin Murray-Boyles, though, has seen some pretty early run. Their most recent draft pick. It was thought that, Murray-Boyles might take some time to be integrated into the rotation. But hey, he's already being called on. He's playing the 6th most minutes per game for this team. And that's already intriguing enough. But I want to watch him in these games and see, is his shooting really that much of an issue? Or is he just actually doing that much that, you can't keep him out of the rotation? Sandro Mamukelashvili has just been an okay offensive backup big, which is, hey, probably better than you were hoping for if you roster him in Dynasty. Jamal Shead has actually intrigued at the backup point guard, getting 5 assists in 17.5 minutes per game. And I never noticed Jamal Shead really having this great passing ability. So is this actually something that I just missed in my watch of the Raptors last season? Or is he actually he's actually a good point guard finding these angles, finding those incisive passes that we talked about littered throughout this pod. We can have the trio of wings here in Grady Dick, Ochai Agbaji, and Jacoby Walter. All this kind of being middling or mediocre this season, and that's saying it pretty nicely. What I want to watch for this upcoming week with them, are any of them showing anything more than just maybe being some threes and some hustle stats? Are these players at best steady Eddie role players who, maybe they get minutes, but they're actually not really too impactful for Dynasty and Fantasy? I don't know. We'll have to see, and we'll come back to that on next week's pod. And lastly, Jonathan Mowo. The offense has been really rough to start the season. And it's probably going to be the case when he gets his spot minutes. It's just not going to look great from him. But I'm hoping I see some more flashes from him. Maybe just some more passing or more defense. Something that he can make more of a calling card to earn his minutes. But based on his early season stats, I very much doubt that's the case, and I think he maybe just below the bar on offense and just below the bar. Rather, I think his defense obviously is great, but he's not good on offense where the defense is worth it, and his defense isn't good enough where you can take that hit on offense. But either way, I'm actually looking forward to just watching all the Raptors games in this upcoming week, seeing how this all works together. Yeah, I watched a good amount of them last week, actually, and I said they've been fun to watch. They play at a high pace, but I'm going to gather all my findings, and we'll kind of report back next week and just look if we should expect should we expect all of this production for their key Dynasty players to keep up? That'll be the question we come to on next week's episode. And that's where I'll leave it here for this episode of the Punt Intended podcast. Yeah, I think it's a great episode. I am looking forward to going over more individual deep player dives as we progress through the season. And then, yeah, I'm actually a statement I did not think I would utter this season. I am looking forward to watching the Toronto Raptors this week. So make sure you tune in next week, get all these additional insights. Remember, if you're on YouTube, hit that like button. If you're on audio, rate, review, subscribe. That sort of stuff would be much appreciated. And then we'll see you next time on the Punt Intended podcast presented by FanDuel.